Welcome back to Anderson Acres. It is a bright and sunny and very, very hot day out today, which is unusual for us this time of year, but I thought it was a good time to talk about watering your garden. So most of us are going to have to supplement the natural rainfall in our area by watering. We're going to have to do this whether we have flowers or a food crop, whether we grow in planter boxes or straight in the ground, whether we use window boxes for herbs, or whether we have an entire plot of land that we grow wheat on. Most of us are going to have to water our gardens. This is mostly because for a lot of crops, the natural rainfall in your area might just not be enough. Or you might just be suffering from a really dry year and you still want to enjoy your tomatoes and your peppers. Or maybe you just need to because you're planting things that don't necessarily belong in your area, but you think they're an attractive plant anyway, and you're willing to do the extra work and water those plants. Whatever it is, you may are almost guaranteed actually to have to water your garden. In some regions, irrigation is a regular requirement. It's absolutely a given that if you plant stuff, you're going to have to water it. In other areas, it may be less frequent. In our area, we don't have to water very much because we do get enough moisture to basically maintain our gardens most of the time, so I only have to water a few times through the year. That may not be true for you. In any region, regardless of where you are, young plants in new beds need regular watering to be established. So when you plant new young plants, you're still going to have to water the heck out of them, even if you get a lot of moisture in your area. Unless it's actively raining, you need to water your new plants. They need water every day or they're not going to establish themselves properly. This also goes for your seedlings and for seeds you're trying to germinate. They need to stay moist. So make sure you're watering those new plants. One of the things you can do to help retain moisture in your garden is use mulch. This isn't for everyone, and I personally am not the biggest fan of mulch, but it does help retain moisture in the soil. It doesn't add any moisture, so having mulch doesn't mean you can just skip watering. It means the water you do put into your garden is going to stay there a little bit longer just because it doesn't evaporate the way a lot of water will evaporate if it's just the bare soil. So mulch or rock cover or something like that in your garden can help you retain moisture. It doesn't add moisture. You want to check on the water needs of your garden daily. Wilted leaves often indicate water stress, and dull or curling leaves are kind of what happens before they wilt. So if the leaves are looking dull or if they're starting to curl but they haven't actually wilted yet, you may have to add some water. But the condition of the leaves can be misleading even for the most experienced of gardeners. Symptoms common to lack of water can also be because they have too much water. So you kind of have to use your judgment there. If it's not rained, then it's probably that they're not getting enough water. If it's been raining a lot, then they're probably waterlogged. So sometimes you have to use a little bit of common sense and stop and think before you add more water to your garden. Some of the symptoms of plants that didn't get enough water are also mimicked by disease or insect damage. So double check your plants, monitor them carefully, figure out why those symptoms are showing up, and if it's because there's not enough water, then definitely add water. The best way to determine when to water is to check the soil itself. If the soil feels dry, and if you have mulch, you have to check the soil underneath the mulch. If it feels dry to the touch, kind of go down a little bit into the soil, maybe 2 or 3 inches below the surface. You don't want to disturb the roots of your plant, so don't do this right next to a plant. But kind of check and see if it's still really dry 2 or 3 inches down. If it's really dry still, then you're probably going to have to water, okay? You do need to check. So kind of, if the soil is dry, stick your fingers into the dirt, just kind of start burrowing your fingers into the dirt and see if it feels dry to you, okay? If you don't want to stick your fingers in there, you can take a light colored stick, like a paint stirrer works well, and kind of bury it 2 or 3 inches down, leave it for an hour, and then see if it starts to get discolored by moisture, because the wood will wick moisture out of the soil, and if there's moisture If the wood itself is darkening because it's getting wet, that's why you need a light colored wood. But if it's darkening because it's soaking up moisture, then you're probably okay. You probably don't need to water. Or you can just look at the soil, feel the soil. There's a lot of ways you can check. I tend to just stick my fingers in the soil. Does it feel damp? If it doesn't, they probably need water. You want to water thoroughly. When you do water, water deeply. Garden plant roots can grow from 1 foot to more than 5 feet deep, depending on what you planted. Wetting just the top few inches of soil could encourage shallow root growth instead of deep root growth, making it necessary for you to water a lot and a lot more frequently, simply because the roots are too close to the surface. So when you want to water deeply. You can water small plants or widely separated plants adequately with just your handheld hose. Use that shower attachment. Don't use that full spraying on the hose. That's going to be terrible. You're going to kill your plants. Use the shower attachment on a hose. So most of those attachments for the hoses, you can change the spray pattern. Use a gentle shower or a gentle rainfall kind of head for your hose. Don't full blast your plants. They're not going to enjoy that. And you could kill them. So definitely be careful with the hose, but you can do it. If you have a really large area, you might want to use sprinklers, because if you're just watering a small bed, then you're probably fine to just stand there for a few minutes and just water with the hose, or even use watering cans. If, however, you don't have a small garden, if it's a rather big space, you might want to get some sprinklers. Sprinklers are a little bit inefficient. So I know, because someone always pops up and says, well, you shouldn't use sprinklers. A lot of the water blows away. Yeah, I know. But they're an easy to use tool that a lot of gardeners can access. So yes, they're inefficient tools because water is blown away by the wind, runs off into the sloped and paved areas of your yard, and falls too far away sometimes, depending on the type of sprinkler. But it does deliver water, especially if you can't stand out there all day watering your plants. So if you can, see if you can't get it so your sprinkler is landing most of the water on the soil of your garden bed. Some people will tell you that if the soil gets on the leaves of your foliage, that the foliage can be a breeding ground for disease, and there is some truth to that. But think about the rain. The rain lands on the foliage anyway. So it's okay if you can't get the sprinkler directly on the base of your plants. If it does have to fall more like a rain shower, that's okay. Sprinklers are inexpensive and easy to use, and they are convenient, especially when you're just getting started. You're probably not going to want to do a full-blown irrigation system just for your little garden. Okay, unless you are growing enough that you want to maybe sell your produce or something, you're probably just going to want to use what you have, and you probably have a sprinkler in your garage. So don't be afraid to use that sprinkler. It is absolutely worth it. So you can also use soaker hoses. I do like soaker hoses. Soaker hoses are basically a long hose that you hook up to your regular hose, and they kind of have holes in them, small, minute holes, not gigantic holes. They kind of have tiny little holes in them, so you can kind of lay them in your garden bed, and water just kind of seeps out over time. So that is a little bit more efficient, actually quite a bit more efficient than a sprinkler. It may not be worth investing into soaker hoses, but you can definitely look into it. I do like soaker hoses for right next to the house where I have like the tomatoes and the pumpkins this year, because if it's a sprinkler, then I have to close all the windows because the sprinkler shoots water into the house. So I do like using the soaker hoses along the house, because then I don't have to get water into the house, and that's totally fine. So make sure you're watering thoroughly. Make sure you are using a tool that makes sense to you. So to make the best use of your sprinkler, watch where you've put it, okay? Your soaker hoses, you just put them next to your plants. You just kind of lay them in lines or in circles in your flower beds. But with the sprinklers, you want to make sure that you are aiming them so that the water is landing where it needs to go. You'll waste less water that way. But don't worry too much about it, because it's a sprinkler. It's just water. It's fine. Try to get the water where it's supposed to go, but don't be afraid to use your sprinklers. Some people will constantly tell you that there's better ways to water. Yeah, there are, but sprinklers are cheap. They're efficient. They work. So are there better ways to do it? Yeah. If you're going to grow a lot, you might want to invest in soaker hoses. That is my preferred method, but sprinklers work too, and we do use sprinklers out in the flower bed simply because I don't have enough soaker hoses. I will eventually get more soaker hoses, but I don't have enough. So you can also get drip irrigation systems, but I'm not going to talk about that today. I will come back next week and talk more in depth about a drip irrigation system that is a little bit more advanced, a little bit more complicated, but if that's something you're interested in, we will come back next week and talk about it. For now, we're just going to leave it there. Either water with the hose, use a watering can, use a soaker hose, or use a sprinkler. Those are really 4 ideal methods that work for the vast majority of gardeners. You probably don't need to invest in anything more expensive just to keep your plants watered. But don't overwater. You want to water deeply and well when you do water, but if the soil is already moist, already damp, don't water. Okay, let the soil dry out a little bit. It's better than keeping it constantly sopping. A constantly sopping soil will lead to root rot. That is about it for us here today at Anderson Acres. Good luck watering those plants. We'll see you tomorrow.